You're listening to The Outcue, a 21 News journalist perspective on a top news story.
Good afternoon and welcome to The Outcue. I am Assistant News Director Justin Mitchell. It is Friday, April 26th. You know, some stories are done in a day, whether they be events or what we call spot news, like an accident or a court hearing. But others, they have a way of coming out a little bit at a time in drips and drabs until you can finally, if you follow it closely, get the bigger picture. And such is the case with the story that we're discussing today, which was also the topic of our very first Outcue, the financial situation in Vienna Township. It's led to steep layoffs in the fire department and the police department. There have been resignations. The Outcue is the term for the last few words of a news story, because what you see on TV is often only the beginning of the story. This is the Outcue. And with me today is anchor reporter Erin Simonek and senior digital manager Robert McFerren. So, Erin, I want to start with you. You were there this week when more pretty dramatic moments happened in Vienna, where there was a special meeting planned, unclear exactly what was going to come out, but it was coming off of the resignation of a trustee, Robert Root. So I just want you to start by taking us inside the room. What was that night like?
So I'll start with this. I've covered this situation a few times now, and the first thing I always notice is that a lot of residents always attend these meetings ever since the fiscal problem started unfolding. And of course, it's, small town America, but everyone's very passionate about what happens in their town. And so I always noticed it's always a packed room. Okay, and this past Monday wasn't really any different. There's still a lot of questions and uncertainty when it comes to where these missing dollars are, maybe who to point fingers to, because that's still very unclear. And as you said, Justin, that it came with the resignation of a township trustee just last week. And so there, of course, is a lot of tension filling the room because there's a lot of mistrust between the two remaining trustees. Also, a lot of people have sympathy for the police chief and the fire chief, who have continuously said that they're not taking pay at this time. And the trustees also are not taking pay at this time as well. But there's a lot of mistrust coming from the room where, the meeting starts and there's whispers among the crowd with whatever the trustees say. If they go into executive session, there's more whispers and there's name calling from the crowd. So it's a very tense situation. And for something like this to come out of such, a small town, it's a lot to pay attention to. And I think a lot of people, as I said, are very passionate about what happens in the town. A lot of people have been from Vienna their entire life. They've called it home for their entire life. And so they want answers. And I think that they deserve answers, of course, because that's where their money's going. And a lot of people know people in the fire department and know people who still work for the police department. And so I think a lot of people feel let down from this fiscal situation that keeps unfolding. And yes, Monday's meeting was very tense, of course.
And I think that, you touched on them, they want answers is what I think it really comes down to. They want to know what's going on because, first of all, we're up to what, $1.3 million now, $1.3 million that are unaccounted for.
Yes.
And that came out of this meeting. We knew we were around $1 million. Yep. They found out it's worse. And it impacts, first of all, this is your tax money. This is money that you've worked for. And you need to be able to count on your elected officials or whoever's in charge of them to make sure that they're being good stewards of it, because now it's also public safety, right? I mean, this is a small, I don't have the figures in front of me for the population of Vienna, but I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000, right? So just for perspective, $1.3 million and even a handful of employees in these two departments is really a lot. If this were a larger city, you'd be talking about a massive, massive amount. Yeah. Now, there are not a ton of answers coming out of these meetings, right? These people want them, and what are they hearing from their elected officials?
Well, so I wanted to bring up, even before the meeting started, I went up to the police and fire chief and I just kind of asked them, hey, what's going on with updates? Are you two hearing anything? Because they've told me consistently that they've felt very out of the loop. And so they pretty much threw their hands up and they said, you probably know as much as we do. One of the, I believe it was the police chief, he told me that he can't even communicate with the trustees. The trustees don't even get back to them, the fire chief and the police chief. And so, of course, they felt very frustrated. And so, consistently the trustees would say, we can't say a lot because, of course, it's a state investigation and we can't give you a lot of answers. And not only did that frustrate the crowd, because that's what they've continuously been saying, but the police and fire chief are officials in this township, and they still feel very much out of the loop. And so the way that Monday's meeting worked, they started the meeting and pretty much right off the bat, they moved into executive session. And that executive session then came with the police chief first being brought in about an hour into executive session. And for those who are unfamiliar, executive sessions can run pretty long, but the police chief, Chief Lute, went in first, and then the fire chief went in about an hour and a half later. And so this is about the 2-hour mark at this point, and you never see the police chief again. He never walks through the door that comes back into the meeting. And so a lot of people were confused and concerned with that. And then when the fire chief came back out, you could tell he was very frazzled. He's an elderly gentleman who announced that he was retiring, but said, I can't leave the department as it is, so I'm going to stay in the department. So, of course, that takes a lot from him to do that, and that's, of course, very brave. But he was very flustered. His wife came over to console him from the crowd. And so you knew that something was going to be announced that people didn't like. And then that's when the trustees came out and said that there would be 3 more layoffs in the fire department and 3 more layoffs in the police department. And for a town like Vienna, that's a large number. So of course people were shouting and saying, shame on you. And the tensions are high, but I know the trustees, they continuously tell us that they are trying what they can do without hurting as many people as possible.
Right. And in an executive session, you can't take action in. So you can meet and you can discuss things like budgets and personnel, but then you do have to take these actions in public. So they do have to come out and face the people. Yes. But there are things that they can't necessarily answer because there is an ongoing state investigation. The state auditor has confirmed that it is a criminal investigation, but what they won't say is who the target of it is, or if there are multiple targets, or
scope or any.
So Robert, what that then takes us out of the meetings that happen and into what we do in between the meetings, which is try to piece this together through documents, right? So, I mean, what we've done is tried to figure out, shouldn't all this be available somewhere?
Yeah, because this is elected officials with community, so this is public records. So we should be able to get the information, but that's where it gets tricky.
Right, because, okay, so dollars and cents, they can't spend money that isn't made available. So I had a rather interesting week or so, well, more than a week, about a month now, back and forth with a couple of one of the trustees, as well as the former and then the current fiscal officer. The former fiscal officer, just to remind everybody who didn't see the first one, and if you're not following this as closely, the former fiscal officer, a woman named Linda McCullough, was already on her way out, but when all of this first broke, the trustees moved to remove her sooner. So there was certainly a cloud of blame they were placing on her for something, whatever it may be. Well, she ended up finishing out her term, and a new fiscal officer, Rhonda Root, took over in April, this month. Mm-hmm. So I put in a request for the budgets. Should be a simple enough thing. And I did get from Linda McCullough before she left a budget for the fire department for last year, for 2023. So now, for comparison's sake, I need the other departments, and I need another year to go by. Yep. Sometimes you need many years, but since this kind of came out of nowhere, you'd have probably had some inclination before 2022. So 2 years to start with, we went with. And this is where it got weird, because I had this one document from McCullough, and then she's gone, never to be heard from again. I can't get a hold of her anymore. And I get a response from trustee Phil Pegg, who tells me that they don't have access to any of these documents, that because it's a state investigation, I'd have to get them from the state auditor. So that seems unusual, but I'll check with the auditor's office. But this is where it gets very tricky. The auditor's office tells me, look, because it's us, because we have an ongoing criminal investigation, we can't give them to you because on our end, these documents are part of an investigation. But you're right, they are public records, and public records, when they're born a public record, always a public record. So when it's part of an investigation, some records are not immediately public, but something like a budget is public from the moment it's born, and an investigation doesn't suddenly make it not public. So they said, so you got to get it from the trustees, and they do have this. This is what I'm getting from the auditor's office. So I go back to the trustees and the new fiscal officer, and I'm repeatedly told they don't have it. And I say, well, can you characterize? Are you saying that they're misplaced? Are they lost? Did someone take them? How do you not have them? Auditor's office says you have them. And I'm getting a sense from them of some frustration, saying, I don't know what to tell you other than I don't have them. You can come here, you can look through our drawers. I don't have them. And so he stopped short of characterizing what he thought happened to them. He just didn't. Well, now, finally, I did get them. I got records. I got the budgets for the police and fire and road departments for 22 and 23. But here's another twist. So we don't know, again, who's investigating what, right?
Yep.
And forgive me for talking so much. I just have to fill in a gap here because this is what I was working on.
Yep.
We make no representations as to whether or not this information is accurate. This is as it was entered into our system by the former fiscal officer. So, of course, implied is if she's under investigation, maybe they're not accurate. We're not saying they're not accurate. We're just saying we have not been able to verify all of these. So what I can tell you a little bit about what's in these, but I'm reluctant to go too far into it because of this concern over their accuracy. But they do show large overages in police and especially in fire. Mostly salaries, a couple other areas as well. Large overages that could theoretically be enough to make up the missing money. They could be. But this is more complicated than ever because I can't go to the auditor's office and say, have you verified these numbers? I will do that, but what they're going to tell me is this is an open investigation. We can't tell. So you've got a state agency trying to verify these numbers and the township trying to verify these numbers. And I'll be honest, this is a situation that I don't recall ever being in. Usually you follow the documents. What's in the documents?
Right.
I've never gotten a document from a public official that's an official document and them tell me what they told me here, which is here they are, and I have no idea if they have any validity.
Right.
But that's what I got here. So both of you guys, I'd just like to talk about that kind of when you hit these roadblocks, how sort of frustrating it is, and also just to illustrate that we're always working on these things. These people want answers. We want to get them answers. I guess, personally, where does it put you when you hit a roadblock like that? Where's your head? What are you thinking?
Well, it makes you angry because these are taxpayer documents, and we should be able to access them and tell the taxpayers, here's what we found. But it gets tricky because, well, the law says, do you have the right to inspect these? But it's promptly. But and within reasonable time. What is reasonable time? Well, we've had, as Justin, you and I know, we have records requests out, some of them going for months. Some of them are simple, but yet they're saying, well, it's complicated, or your request, is not clear of what you're asking for.
Too broad.
Too
right?
broad is the term. That is the term they like to use. Yes.
And I know too, when I was at the meeting, when they announced the layoffs, the additional layoffs to the fire and police, someone in the crowd shouted, "Well, where's our taxpayer money back if you're laying off these official, or if you're laying off these employees? You know, we pay for these departments, so when will we see our money back?" And so, you know, of course, the tension rises because people, it's their taxpayer dollars, like Robert said. And I went into this room with one of the trustees, Phil Pegg, and he opened filing cabinets for me. And I was with another media outlet too, and he was telling us, you know, look through these. These are all old documents. I don't have what you're requesting. And so you could see the frustration in his mind too. And I think attention is a great word to use because, like you said, public record is a public record, but they promised us that they don't have these, and you know, the new fiscal officer sent you.
Yeah, they found them 2 days later. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so, you know, she is coming into the position in a very strange and hostile time in the township. And yeah, it's very tense, I think is a great word to use.
And you find yourself, you know, listen, you don't want to, I'm not calling anybody a liar here. I'm not calling anybody's integrity into question. But when this all shakes out, somebody's will be.
Yes.
I just don't know whose.
Right.
You have a scenario here, and again, I said I've never seen this
Yeah.
before, where it is possible that there was mismanagement of the money, whether it's just overspending or not having your eye on the ball in these departments.
Yeah.
It's possible that whether it be, I don't know, a fire chief, a police chief, a fiscal officer, the trustees just didn't pay attention to them racking up deficits. That is a possible scenario, in which case you'd be able to point fingers to who was to blame. In another scenario, if these numbers are not accurate, where did the money go and who is to blame? And how's this for another layer? I'm left having to put all my trust in the state auditor's office, whose job it is to look into this, but they are another public agency
Right.
who you are to treat with skepticism in this business, right? So,
Yep.
so you have to hope that they're doing everything on the up and up. And how do you trace that? Well, you're left stymied. You're waiting for the results of an investigation so that you can read it and see if you've got questions about it. And that, quite frankly, I don't know about you guys. To me, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to have to keep looking for ways to paint this picture. Because the state auditor's investigation, that could go months, it could go years. You
Absolutely.
can get extensions on these things.
Yep.
The law allows them to end at a certain point unless they're not done, and then they just get an extension.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, is that no one knows really who to point fingers at. And so the trustees saying they're doing what they can, and they're also confused and left in the dark, but then they're supposed to be representing the township.
Okay.
And so the crowd is very confused. And obviously a lot of the concern is about the former fiscal officer, Linda McCullough. And then Phil Pegg, trustee Phil Pegg, just told me this previous Monday that they could be going into what is known as a fiscal emergency for the township as early as May, which is what, next week, right?
Yep.
Or
Yeah.
Yep.
And so this story is definitely not finished, and it won't be finished anytime soon.
And when they go into fiscal emergency, the state essentially moves in and takes over,
Right.
and they start to put them on track. And that's not uncharted territory. The city of Niles was in that situation. I've seen some school districts in that situation. In Pennsylvania, they call it, I think it's called Act 47, but it's the same thing. So it's that's not an unusual situation, but it's certainly not a good one.
No, and the trust is already broken now for this poor community who doesn't know which way to turn, because all they know is they don't have police, they don't have fire, their safety services are decimated.
They're scared.
Absolutely. So all we can do is to continue to give you guys the updates that we can give you. We're going to keep asking questions. We're going to keep pointing out holes in whatever we do get. And this is going to be one of those stories that we may not have the full picture of anytime soon, but
We're going to keep working it.
we'll keep working it, and we'll keep explaining how we do the work. And listen, if you guys know anything or have suggestions for things we ought to be asking that we're not thinking of, that's one of the reasons we do this. news@wfmj.com, watchdog@wfmj.com. You can call the newsroom and talk to one of us, 330-744-8821. You'll really talk to a guy named Zach. He's lovely. And we're going to stay on it, and we're going to stay on it for the long haul. That's our promise to you. And this has been this week's episode of the Outcue.